Is data alive? I think this is one of the most interesting questions asked in the next generation. It's obvious that the writers wanted us to view data as a being akin to humans, alive just like us with all the freedoms and autonomy afforded to us and every other species the Galactic Federation encounters. What is interesting about data's status as a living being is how often that very status is challenged and to what extent he can express his bodily autonomy. One such episode that challenges Data's status as a living person is Measure of a Man, episode 9 of season 2. I believe that this is the very first time that Data's status as a living being is put to the test and is the focus of the story. The episode goes like this. Bruce Maddox wants to experiment on Data in order to recreate Dr. Nguyen Song's work, and in order to do that, he has to cut Data's brain open and piece him back together again. Data does not believe that Maddox is capable of performing such a task. However, Maddox isn't taking no for an answer. Maddox calls Data's status as a living being into question. His argument being that since Data is a machine that was created by a Starfleet scientist, any and all of that scientist's work is the property of Starfleet, including Data. However, this wasn't Maddox's first argument. He actually had an admiral order Data to undergo the procedure, but Data decided to quit Starfleet instead, and here we are. Of course, Picard comes to Data's aid, and he makes an argument that, of course, Data is not the property of Starfleet, and a legal battle ensues from this. But before I get too ahead of myself, let's take a step back, because I think there are some glaring holes in the story up to this point. First off, how is it that a commanding officer can compel their subordinates to undergo non emergency medical procedures? We literally never see this ever, and I think it's because it's not allowed to happen. I feel like Picard could have used this angle to help Data get out of the operation, because Maddox had not yet called into question Data's status as a living person. Effectively, Data was still a Starfleet officer at this time and still had all the rights and freedoms afforded to one. It's also weird how little influence Picard had on the admiral that gave Maddox the go ahead. Picard is famous to literally everyone in Starfleet. The Enterprise is the flagship of the Federation, and I would imagine that its captain and her crew's word would have more weight. I also think it's weird how the court case even came about and how it's structured. Now, since there isn't enough personnel at the new starbase they're at, they have to set up an impromptu trial with a judge advocate general for the sector, Philippa Louveau, I believe that's how you pronounce her name, as the presiding judge, Picard serving as Data's defense counsel, and of course, Riker serving as the prosecution. The reason this all shakes out the way that it does is because apparently, if there aren't any actual lawyers or whatever the Starfleet equivalent is on board, then whoever is there is supposed to fill in as needed, depending on rank. Not only that, but if there is a conflict of interest, like Riker not wanting to prosecute Data because he doesn't believe that Data should be prosecuted, then the court will automatically default to a decision in favor of the prosecution. And if the judge decides the prosecution isn't doing a good enough job, by whatever standards that is, then tough luck, the prosecution wins anyway. This is literally stupid. Why would they not postpone the trial until they had the proper personnel? Why would they allow such a profound and outspoken conflict of interest to represent the prosecution? Why is it that it seems that the court is so heavily weighted towards the accuser, the prosecution, winning the case? I mean, just imagine if this was any other scenario. I could imagine someone taking someone else to court under these exact circumstances, knowing that the outcome is weighted in favor of the prosecution by default. I mean, there are some crazy flaws in the logic of the law in the Federation in respect to this episode, and I just wanted to point that out because it bothers me. Now for the actual court case. This case has to be one of the most well written and thought provoking set of scenes in the history of Star Trek. I cannot stress enough how the acting was nothing less than superb here. The slight resignation of Riker as he begins to speak, though he feels that what he is doing, saying, and proving is wrong, he bears no hesitation, because to hesitate is to condemn his friend to death. I don't think people really give Riker his flowers for this episode, and that's just a shame. As he speaks, it's almost as if the very words leaving his mouth cut his lips upon exiting. After he turns Data off, he puts his hand over his mouth and looks off into the distance. And within his eyes, you can read his mind as clear as day. Dear God, what have I done? The points that Riker proves are damn near insurmountable. Data's acute strength, intelligence, and origins are all scrutinized in the worst possible ways, but everything Riker says is the absolute truth. They know it, And so do we. Try as he might, Picard doesn't have so much as a prayer in defending against the blatancy of Riker's claims. That is, until he speaks with Guinan in 10 Forward and discovers an impregnable defense. The second half of the trial has Picard performing an amazing monologue, most likely one of the best monologues in TV history. His argument is that it is exceedingly difficult to tell whether something is sentient or not. He questions Maddox on whether or not Picard himself is sentient. And of course, Maddox laughs this off, saying, obviously, Picard is sentient. How could he not be? He probes further and asks Maddox to give him a criteria of sorts on why Picard is sentient, and then Picard proceeds to flip it on him, using his very own criteria to prove that Data is in fact sentient. Man, the writers had to been chefing it the fuck up in the writers' room to come up with this straight heat. They must have been watching some Law and Order, Sopranos, Dick Tracy, something, cause goddamn, is this some fire writing? But it doesn't last. Well, at least not to me. Picard goes on to define Data as a race, and the implications of servitude that that race would face if Data's autonomy was stripped away from him. Slavery. That's exactly what Guinan had talked to him about in 10 Forward. Now, this is amazing work. It truly tugs at the heartstrings of the viewer and, of course, the judge herself. It humanizes Data and makes everyone feel just how alive Data is. What it doesn't do is prove anything. There's like so many different ways Picard could have played his defense. He could have denied the fact that Data was even Starfleet property to begin with. I mean, Dr. Noonien Sung had been missing for decades. He is still missing at this point. The Federation currently thinks he is dead. By all accounts, I would argue that he and any of his later projects and research was made independently of the Federation. Now, yes, Dr. Nguyen Sung is currently living on a Federation colony at this time, but they don't know this. And I would also argue that doesn't mean that everything there belongs to the Federation. I highly doubt that the Federation is that totalitarian when it comes to the people that live on their colonies and what they produce. But correct me if I'm wrong, all right? Not only that, but the people that first encountered Data treated him as a human being. That first contact and all others throughout his time on Earth, the enrollment and graduation from Starfleet Academy, and his immaculate, spotless record as a Starfleet officer shows that Data has been treated like a human from the very beginning. How can you take away something that has already been given? Either way, Picard got the job done, and Data was finally legally recognized as an independent being, alive, and afforded all the rights and freedoms as any other species would have. They won the case, but by the skin of their teeth. But was this the correct verdict? Is Data really alive? Well, I think that we all are anthropomorphizing Data. He is not human, that's for damn sure, but neither is a Klingon or a Romulan. The fact of the matter is that Data was made in our image. He was made to behave, act, and look just like us. It was the intention of Dr. Nguyen Song for Data to be anthropomorphized by other humans, as he had done with Data and Lore himself. So the question really is, at what point does our own psychological distinctions carry over into the reality of whether or not what we anthropomorphize is like us enough to be seen as an equal to us? Even Mattis has an issue with this because by the end of the episode, he too calls Data a he instead of an it. So, is Data truly alive? Well, I don't think the answer is as cut and dry as they make it seem in this episode. However, I doubt that his status as alive or property of Starfleet would have ever been in question if Data did not look like a human. Just a bit of food for thought. Of course, there are plenty of other episodes regarding Data's status as alive and his rights within the Federation, but we'll have to cover those in another video, because this one's already longer than I expected. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments, and thanks for watching, of course. Peace.